was an article I happened to see. I think it was on RT. COVID-19 may have originated in US Biolab, Lancet Commission Chair announces. So the subheading is Jeffrey Sachs, who chairs the COVID-19 Commission at the prestigious medical journal, I believe it's the Lancet, has claimed the deadly virus did not come out of nature. So let's read this. COVID-19 did not come out of some natural reservoir, but rather, quote, out of a US lab biotechnology. In an accident, world-renowned economist and author Jeffrey Sachs has claimed. Speaking at a conference hosted by the Gates Center think tank in Spain in mid-June. While introducing this provocative statement, Sachs suggested he was in the loop as he chairs the COVID-19 Commission at prestigious medical journal, The Lancet. So it's a blunder, in my view, of biotech, not an accident of natural spillover, he reiterated. The academic noted that while we don't know for sure if this is the case, there is enough evidence pointing to this which should be looked into. Sachs lamented that this version is, and I'm going to have to get out of this. However, quote, not being investigated in the United States. I can't quite see that. So then there's the credentials of Sachs and his colleague in this, Professor of Pharmacology and Therapeutics, Neil Harrison. And then it goes on. So none of these materials have been subjected to independent, transparent, and scientific scrutiny, they argued. So this is the important point that I wanted to emphasize here. There's a couple. As an indicator, so this is the explanation of how they know this. As an indicator that COVID-19 had originated from a laboratory, the authors brought up the fact that a sequence of 8 amino acids on a critical part of the virus's spike protein is similar to an amino acid sequence found in cells that line human airways. And then he's not the first to suggest the deadly virus did not occur naturally. There's no conclusive evidence that would trace the origin beyond a reasonable doubt. The WHO said in February 2020 that it was most likely transmitted from an animal, possibly a bat, because we all know that humans like to eat raw bats, and then the usual thing. So I followed up with this to see the article that this came from, or the where Mr. Sachs, Professor Sachs, I guess you would call him, actually said this, and I found this. Whoops. And so I don't remember exactly where this came from, but this is from them, Sachs and Harrison. We do not know whether the insertion of the FCS was the result of natural evolution, perhaps via recombination event in an intermediate mammal or a human, or was the result of a deliberate introduction of the FCS, that's the sequence, into a SARS-like virus as part of a laboratory experiment, Sachs and Harrison write. We do know that the insertion of such FCS sequences into SARS-like viruses was a specific goal of work proposed by the EHA-WIV-UNC partnership within a 2018 grant proposal, Diffuse, that was submitted to the DARPA U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects. By the way, as far as I know, that the grant was proposed, but it was actually never funded. So the evidence here, let me go back. So this sort of confirms what Sachs and Harrison actually said, that the evidence is a sequence of 8 amino acids in a critical part of the virus's spike protein is similar to a sequence found in the cells that line human airways. Now, why am I bringing this up? There's a few reasons. The first is I happen to know Jeffrey Sachs, and the reason I happen to know him, and if somebody can send this to him that he'll actually get, I would appreciate that, and I would like to send my greetings to Jeffrey. The reason I know him is I grew up in Oak Park, Michigan, and Jeffrey Sachs also grew up in Oak Park, Michigan. He was a few years older than me. I think he was 1 year older than my sister, and he and my sister were actually very good friends. So Jeffrey spent a lot of time at our house. And later, when Jeffrey was a teenager, 16, 17, I guess, he ended up being, I don't know all the details, but a frequent bridge partner of my mother's, who it turns out, she never talked about it, but she was apparently an international grandmaster at bridge. I'm not sure if that's actually correct, but that's what I hear. She was very good, and she won all sorts of tournaments. And I apparently, a lot of times, because Jeffrey would come to our house to pick my mother up, and they would go to bridge events or tournaments or whatever, the bridge club. And I can tell you that anybody who was playing bridge with my mother was a very good bridge player, for one. And it was pretty much widely known that Jeffrey was probably the smartest person any of us knew. He, I believe, was the valedictorian of his class. And this was a pretty high-powered high school, even though it was a public high school. It was very intense academic environment. He went on to Harvard as an undergraduate, then got a PhD in economics from Harvard. And I'm not sure if this is 100% accurate, but I've heard that he was the youngest tenured Harvard professor ever. Again, I'm not sure if that's 100% true, but close. I think he was like 26. He went on to teach at Harvard, and then he wrote a bunch of books about the end of poverty, which didn't turn out so well, apparently, and helped with rebuilding the Russian economy under Yeltsin, which also apparently didn't turn out so well. And then he went on to Columbia, and I don't know exactly what else, and as I say, wrote a bunch of books. And now he turns up as the head of a coronavirus committee or a COVID committee for the Lancet. And I know that he was one of the few people on the Vatican COVID task force, or whatever they call that. So that was another reason why I was interested in what he has to say here, because there is a very clear and simple reason, why this problem will never be solved by the likes of these people, and why there is a very simple explanation for why you would find a amino acid sequence found in human airways in the alleged spike protein of the alleged virus. So this is like the reason why this problem has not been solved and will never be solved is because it's similar to trying to answer the question, how did unicorns end up with gold hoofs? And so if you propose that question, you will go for months, years, decades, probably centuries, arguing about how that came about. And people will give you all kinds of reasons why they know that A, this is gold, and B, that it's part of a unicorn, and C, these are the only animals that have gold hooves. Who could have possibly done this? Was this the brilliance of the creator? Was this natural selection, common evolution? Did some smart people back in the year 5000 BC genetically engineer golden hoofs for unicorns? And this will be debated forever until some silly person, and I guess that's the role that I'm playing here, will say, wait a minute, there's no unicorns, and so they can't possibly have gold hoofs. You must have mistaken this for something else. And it turns out every single observation that you made in these thousands of years will be explained by realizing that the gold was something else and there are no unicorns. So what is the very simple explanation? And so, Jeffrey, if you hear this, you should pay attention to this, because this will solve all of your questions about this. The reason there is a sequence of human airways in this supposed spike protein is because that is where it came from. And since nobody isolated, i.e. purified, a virus out of the concoction that contains human airway cells, nobody proved that there is a spike protein part of this alleged virus. It's not surprising that you would find human airway sequences in a culture whose origin was broken down lung tissue. It's also not surprising that the sicker you are, meaning the more your lungs have broken down, the more likely you are to find this sequence, because that's exactly where it came from, the cells that line human airways. There is no virus. So this explains every single observation you could see. Nobody engineered it. Nobody put it in anything. They just, as we know from Carrie Mullis and others, PCR can amplify any sequence, any amount of any sequence. So they're basically doing cultures from human airways, amplifying sequences, finding it in the broken down airway samples. And that is how they came to the conclusion that there are these 8 amino acid sequence from humans in the alleged virus. It's the exact same thing as the unicorn. Once you get away from from thinking there's a unicorn and realize there's no unicorn, the whole thing, every single observation makes perfect sense. And if you don't realize that, you will fight over this for the rest of your life and never come to an answer, because you cannot find the origin of something, where it came from, if the something doesn't actually exist. And Jeffrey, I know how smart you are. You should be able to figure this one out. It's not that complicated.